Anarcho-Capitalism versus Socialist Communism mock debate. I'm here to dissect the futility of debating a socialist communist, a pursuit as fruitless as arguing with a flat earther about gravity. As an objectivist anarcho-capitalist, I stand on the unassailable foundation of reason, individual rights, and voluntary exchange. Socialism and communism, by their very nature, reject reality. They deny humans' nature, drive for self-interest, ignore objective laws of economics, and worship the collective as a mystical entity superior to the individual. Debating such ideologues is futile because their premises are rooted in evasion of facts, emotional appeals to envy, and a willful blindness to history's bloody refutations. They are, quite simply, the stupidest people on the planet, not due to innate incapacity, but because they choose to chain their minds to dogmas that defy logic and evidence. Today, I'll demonstrate why their system is morally bankrupt and particularly disastrous, built on the theft disguised as virtue. Comrades, this so-called debate exposes the arrogance of the bourgeois individualist who cloaks exploitation in the language of reason while ignoring the masses' suffering. As a socialist communist, I advocate for a society where the means of production are owned collectively, ending the capitalist cycle of inequality and alienation. Debating an anarcho-capitalist is challenging, not futile, because their ideology serves the elite, pretending that unfettered markets liberate when they enslave. They call us stupid? That's the desperate slur of those who fear the truth. Capitalism breeds poverty, war, and environmental ruin, while communism promises equality and human fulfillment. I'll show how their objectivism is subjective hypocrisy, defending greed as morality. History marches toward collective liberation, and no amount of Randian rhetoric can halt it. Definitions of key terms. To ensure clarity, I'm going to define the core ideologues at play, drawing from their own foundational thinkers like Ayn Rand for objectivism and Karl Marx for socialist communism. Anarcho-capitalism, with objectivist lens, a system advocating the complete abolition of the state, where all services, including law, defense, and arbitration, are provided through voluntary private contracts in a free market. Objectivism adds a philosophical backbone. Reality exists independently of any consciousness. Reason is man's means of knowledge, rational self-interest, egoism is the moral code, and laissez-faire capitalism is the only system respecting individual rights to life, liberty, and property. No initiation of force is permitted. All interactions must be consensual. A transitional and ultimate societal framework where socialism, state ownership of the production to redistribute wealth, leads to communism, a stateless class society with common ownership and free from according to his ability to each according to his needs. It views history as a class struggle, with capitalism as exploitative. The proletariat must seize the power of unlimited private property, ending alienation and creating true equality through collective control. Main arguments and counter-arguments. Anarcho-capitalism argument: why debating socialist communist is futile. The futility stems from their epistemological root. They evade reason at every turn. First, socialist communists reject objective reality by claiming needs trump rights, ignoring that wealth isn't a static pie but created through individual innovation. History shows their experiments, Soviet famine, Mao's Great Leap Backward, Venezuelan collapse, results in millions dead, yet they dismiss these as not real communism, a not true Scotsman fallacy that betrays intellectual dishonesty. Second, their morality is altruistic poison, demanding sacrifice for the collective, is just envy-fueled theft, violating the trader principle where value exchanges value voluntarily. Third, economically, they ignored incentives. Without private rights, production halts, as seen in every planned economy shortages. Debating them is futile because they don't argue in good faith. They appeal to emotions, redefine terms mid-debate, IG exploitation as any profit, and resort to ad hominems when cornered. They're the stupidest because they choose mysticism over logic, collectivism over individualism, making rational discourse impossible. This anarcho-capitalist tirade reveals their ideological blindness. Calling us futile to debate is a cop-out to avoid confronting capitalist failures. We don't evade reality, we analyze it dialectically, seeing how capitalist contradictions, overproduction, inequality lead to crises like the 2008 crash or endless imperial wars for resources. History? Your free markets birth slavery, colonialism, and modern sweatshops. Billions suffer while a few hoard wealth. Our not real communism isn't evasion, it's acknowledging sabotage by capitalist encirclement and internal betrayals. But successes like Cuba's healthcare or China's poverty reduction prove the model's potential. Morally, your egoism is sociopathic greed. Truth ethic demands solidarity, ending exploitation where workers create value, but owners steal surplus. Economically, markets breed chaos, monopolies, bubbles, environmental devastation, while planning allocates rationality for human needs, not profit. We're not stupid, we're visionary, fighting for the oppressed. Your reason is just rationalizing privilege. Ah yes, the predictable pivot to dialectics, a fallacy term for contradiction embracing nonsense that leads you hold A and not A simultaneously. Like claiming state coercion leads to stateless freedom. Your analysis is cherry-picking, ignoring how free market lifted billions from poverty via global trade, while your regimes starved their own. Cuba's healthcare? Built on stolen property and forced labor, with doctors fleeing en masse, hardly a success. China's poverty reduction? Only after ditching pure communism for market reforms, proving my point. You decry monopolies, but they're state-granted privileges, not market outcomes. In true anarcho-capitalism, competition erodes them without your bureaucratic meddling. Morally, your solidarity is forced at gunpoint. Altruism's endgame is the gulag for dissenters. Economically, central planning fails because no committee can match the price signals of voluntary exchanges, as Mises proved in his calculation debate. Without markets, you're guessing in the dark, leading to inefficiency and tyranny. Your appeals to oppressed masses are emotional blackmail, evading the fact that individuals, not classes, think and produce. Debating remains futile. You redefine failures as victories, ignore incentives, and claim faith in the collective deity. It's not vision, it's delusion. Make you impervious to reason, and thus the stupidest interlocutors imaginable. Moral defense of anarcho-capitalism. Through objective perspective, at its core, anarcho-capitalism upholds the sanctity of the individual as the moral absolute. Man survives by reason, not instinct, so his right to think, act, and keep the fruits of his labor is inviolable. Egoism isn't greed, it's the virtue of pursuing one's rational self-interest without sacrificing others or demanding unearned sacrifices. In this system, trade is mutual benefit. A doctor heals for payment, a farmer grows for profit, creating a harmony of interest where force is banished. Morality demands rejecting the initiation of violence, which governments embody through taxes, theft, and regulations control. By privatizing everything voluntarily, society achieves justice. Those who produce thrive, parasites wither, fostering innovation and human flourishing. It's the only system aligning with reality. Men are ends to themselves, not means to the collective ends. To live as a rational being is to reject altruism's guilt and embrace proud, productive achievement. Socialist communism defends the inherent dignity of all humanity through collective emancipation. Under capitalism, individuals are alienated. Workers toil for others' profit, losing control over their labor and lives, breeding despair and inequality. Morality lies in recognizing our interconnectedness. No one is an island, and no true freedom comes from ending exploitation where the strong prey on the weak. By abolishing private property, not personal possessions, but means of production, we eliminate classes, allowing each to contribute by ability and received by need, fostering cooperation over competition. This isn't sacrifice, it's justice, rectifying historical thefts like enclosure or imperialism that concentrated wealth. Ethically, it elevates the community, ensuring no child starves like billionaires hoard, promoting solidarity as the highest virtue. In communism's stateless phase, humans achieve self-realization through shared abundance, unburdened by scarcity artificial claims. It's a moral imperative to fight for this. As passivity perpetuates suffering, the greater good demands transforming society for universal well-being. The introduction to the Mises economic calculation debate. The economic calculation debate, often centered on Ludwig von Mises' groundbreaking 1920 essay, Economic Calculation in the Socialist Commonwealth, is a pivotal intellectual clash in 20th century economics. It addresses a fundamental question: can socialist economy, where the means of production are collectively owned and centrally planned without private property or market prices, rationally allocate resources to meet human needs? Mises, a key figure in the Austrian School of Economics, argued that such a system is inherently impossible, not just inefficient, but literally incapable of performing the complex calculations required for economic coordination. This sparked debates of responses from socialist economics who propose alternatives like market simulation or computational planning, only for Austrians like Mises and Friedrich Hayek to define their critiques. The debate isn't merely historical, it underscores ongoing tensions between market-driven individualism and collectivist planning, influencing discussions on everything from Soviet-era economics to modern proposals for democratic socialism. At its core, the debate revolves around economic calculation, the process by which societies determine what to produce, how to produce it, for whom, and while minimizing waste and maximizing value. Mises contended that this requires genuine market prices formed through voluntary exchange of private-owned goods, something socialists abolishes by design. Socialists countered that planning boards or algorithms could replace the surplus market, yet as the debate evolved, Austrians emphasized not just calculation, but dispersed knowledge and incentives, revealing socialism's deeper flaws. Mises' original argument, the impossibility theorem. Ludwig von Mises launched the debate with the razor-sharp thesis: socialism, by eliminating private ownership of the means of production, factories, land, capital goods, destroys the basis for rational economic calculation. Without markets for these factors, there are no genuine prices to guide decisions. Prices aren't arbitrary numbers, they emerge from countless individual exchanges, reflecting scarcity, preferences, and opportunity costs. Consider an example. Mises used building a railroad. Under capitalism, entrepreneurs compared monetary costs, wages, materials, against expected revenues, using market prices to decide if it's worthwhile. In socialism, a central planner lacks these prices because capital goods aren't traded. Everything is state-owned. How does the planner know if steel should go to railroads, bridges, or cars? Without profit loss signals, allocation becomes guesswork, leading to waste and shortages. Mises stressed that money is essential here. It allows consumability, letting planners calculate by adding costs in a common unit. Socialism's in-kind accounting, e.g. tons of steel, can't compare heterogeneous goods rationally. Mises wasn't arguing socialism would produce nothing. He acknowledged it could muddle through basic tasks like a primitive household economy, but for a complex modern division of labor, it's impossible, dooming society to inefficiency and collapse. This wasn't a political rant, it was an epistemological claim. Human minds can't survey the vast array of production and possibilities without market tools. Mises drew an Austrian value theory where prices reflect subjective valuations, not objective labor values, as is Marxism. Critically, Mises separated this from the incentive problem. People won't work harder under socialism. His point was structural. Even with perfect altruists, calculation fails because knowledge of costs and values isn't centralized. It's dispersed among millions. A socialist response attempts at market simulation and planning. Socialists didn't concede. Early critics like Otto Neurath proposed natural economy, planning without money, using statistics on needs and outputs. The main rebuttals came in the 1930s from neoclassical economists sympathetic to socialism like Oskar Lange and Albert Lerner, who claimed to solve Mises' challenge through market socialism. Lange's model envisioned a central planning board, CPB, simulating markets. State-owned firms produce goods, but managers follow parametric prices set by the CBP. If surplus arise, lower prices, shortages, raise them, mimicking supply and demand equilibrium via trial and error. Land argued that this could achieve parity efficiency better than capitalism. avoiding monopolies and unemployment. He credited Enrico Barano's 1908 work for showing the theoretical calculation without actual markets, using equations to optimize allocation. Other socialists, Maurice Dubb, emphasized centralized planning over simulation, arguing that socialism's strength is long-term coordination, not short-term pricing. They pointed to real-world successes like Soviet's industrialization, claiming Mises ignored dynamic factors like technological progress. Critics from the left in modern takes dismiss Mises as a comedy, arguing his assumption about prices ignores socialist alternatives like labor time vouchers or cybernetic planning, e.g. Chile's Project Cybernism under Allende. These responses assume planners could access or compute the data markets provided, treating the economy as solvable equation set. Lang famously taunted Mises, suggesting a statue of him in the planning hall for starting the debate. Austrian counter-responses, Hayek, knowledge problem, and beyond. Mises and Hayek didn't retreat. They sharpened the blade. Mises reiterated in later works, e.g. Socialism 1922, that simulated prices aren't real. They lack the entrepreneurial discovery process where prices emerge from rival bids and genuine risk-taking. Lang, trial and error? It's a farce, as planners can't know what to try without market-generated data. Hayek extended this in his 1945 essay, The Use of Knowledge in Society, shifting focus to the knowledge problem. Economic knowledge isn't given, it's tacit, dispersed, and contextual, e.g. a miner's hunch about ore quality. Markets aggregate this via prices, but central planning can't, leading to fatal conceit. This evolved a debate. It's not just about static calculation, but dynamic discovery under uncertainty. Austrians like Israel Kernzer later emphasized entrepreneurship. Markets are equilibrium machines, but processes where alert individuals spot profit opportunities, correcting miscalculations. Socialism stifles this, as there's no private profit motive to drive innovation. Responses to computational socialism, e.g. using supercomputers, note that even infinite processing power can't capture subjective, changing human values or unforeseen events. Historical outcome and modern relevance. By the 1940s, mainstream economists declared socialists as the winners, citing that Lang's model as proof socialism could work economically. But history vindicated Mises. The Soviet Union's collapse in 1991 exposed chronic shortages, inefficiencies in black markets, precisely the calculation failures he predicted. China's shift to market reforms post-Mao further illustrates that socialism with Chinese characteristics succeeds only by reintroducing prices and property. Today, the debate resurfaces in discussions of algorithmic planning, e.g. Amazon's logistics as a model for socialism, or green central planning. Austrians counter that big data can't replace decentralized markets, as seen in failed experiments like Venezuela. Philosophically, Mises argued, is conceptual. Socialism contradicts the logic of action in a scarce world. While socialists highlighted capitalist inequalities, the debate shows markets aren't perfect, but uniquely capable of rational coordination. In sum, Mises' insights remains irrefuted. Without private property and markets, economic calculation devolves into arbitrary command, stifling human progress. The debate teaches that freedom isn't just moral, it's economically essential. Now the debate, 1984, socialism or capitalism, which is a moral system? This took place in Toronto, Canada, amid a snowstorm that did not deter an audience of approximately 1,700 attendees. Organized as a public forum, it pitted two prominents of laissez-faire capitalism, Leonard Peikoff and John Ridpath, against two advocates of socialism, Jill Vickers and Gerald Kaplan. Peikoff, a philosopher and the intellectual heir to Ayn Rand, who passed away in 1982, represented the objectivist perspective, emphasizing reason, individual rights, and rational self-interest as the moral foundation of capitalism. Ridpath, a historian and objectivist scholar, complimented Peikoff by drawing on historical examples and economic principles. On the opposing side, Vickers, a political scientist and feminist scholar, and Kaplan, a political activist and commentator associated with Canada's New Democratic Party, defended socialism as a system rooted in collective welfare, equality, and social justice. This debate occurred during a period of heightened ideological tension in the West, with the Cold War still raging, and figures like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher championing free market reforms against the backdrop of Soviet-style socialism perceived failures. The focus was explicitly on morality, not mere economics or practicality. Which system aligns with the ethical principles that respect human nature and promote flourishing? The format included opening statements, rebuttals, and cross-examinations, and closing arguments allowing for direct clashes on philosophical premises. Remastered video footage and partial transcripts reveal a structured yet passionate exchange where the capitalist framed socialism as inherently coercive and immoral, while the socialists portrayed capitalism as exploitative and indifferent to human needs. Summary of key arguments. The capitalist position, morality rooted in the individual rights and freedom. Peikoff and Ridpath opened by defining capitalism as a social system based on the recognition of individual rights, including property rights, where all interactions are voluntary and the government is limited to protecting those rights from force or fraud. Drawing from Ayn Rand's Objectivism, Peikoff argued that morality derives from the requirements of human survival. Man survives by his reason, not instinct, and thus requires freedom to think, act, and pursue his own happiness without interference. Capitalism, in this view, is the only system that bans the initiation of physical force, allowing individuals to trade value for value through mutual consent. Peikoff emphasized that egoism, rational self-interest, is virtuous as it encourages productivity and innovation and benevolence born of genuine respect, not duty. Ridpath bolstered this with historical contrast, noting how capitalist societies foster wealth creation and personal achievement, while socialist regimes lead to stagnation and tyranny. They rejected socialism as altruistic collectivism, where the individual's life is subordinated to the group, requiring sacrifice and state coercion. In rebuttals, Peikoff challenged the socialist premises, arguing that concepts like social justice imply the redistribution of wealth, which violates rights and incentivizes parasitism. The capitalists repeatedly invoked the trader principle, exchanging value without force as the moral essence of capitalism, contrasting with socialism's gun principle of compulsion. The socialist position, morality rooted in equality and collective welfare. Vickers and Kaplan countered by defining socialism as a way of life emphasizing community, cooperation, and equitable distribution of resources rather than just state ownership. They argue that capitalism is immoral because it perpetuates inequality, exploitation, and alienation, where the wealthy profit at the expense of the vulnerable. Morality for them stems from solidarity and meeting human needs collectively, with the state acting as the democratic tool to ensure fairness. Victors highlighted feminist critiques suggesting capitalism reinforces patriarchal structures and ignores unpaid labor like childcare, while Kaplan pointed to real-world examples like Scandinavian social democracies as moral success, blending markets with welfare to reduce poverty. In the rebuttals, the socialists accused the capitalists of idealism, claiming pure laissez-faire has never existed and leads to monopolies and crises, e.g. the Great Depression. They defended socialism's moral code as altruistic compassion, arguing that individual rights must be balanced against societal obligations to prevent suffering. However, they conceded that extreme forms of Stalinism were aberrations, insisting democratic socialism avoids such pitfalls through electoral accountability. In-depth analysis, philosophical foundation, and clashes. The debate step lies in the philosophical underpinnings. Peikoff and Ridpath operated from Objectivism's integrated framework: metaphysics, objective reality, epistemology, reason, ethics, rational egoism, and politics, capitalism as a system protecting rights. They systematically dismantled socialism by tracing its moral claims to anti-reason premises, such as mysticism, faith in the collective, or subjectivism, needs dictating rights. For instance, Peikoff argued that socialism called for sacrifice inverts morality. Instead of man living for his own sake, he becomes a means to others' end, leading to resentment and conflict. This was illustrated through examples like welfare states breeding dependency, where productive individuals are penalized to subsidize the unproductive. In contrast, Vickers and Kaplan arguments were more pragmatic and eclectic, drawing from Marxist influences, class struggle, Keynesian economics, state intervention, and humanistic ethics, empathy as virtue. They avoided deep philosophical defense, focusing on outcomes like reduced inequality and mixed economies. This led to key clashes. When pressed on the initiation of force, i.e. taxation for redistribution, the socialists justified it as necessary for the common good. But Peikoff reframed it as a immoral theft, violating the non-aggression principle. Ridpath used historical evidence, such as the productivity boom in 19th century America versus Soviet shortages, to argue that capitalism aligns with human nature's need for incentives and autonomy. Cross-examinations highlighted inconsistencies. Peikoff questioned how socialists could claim morality while endorsing force, leading to invasive responses about democratic consent. Vickers attempted to humanize socialism by emphasizing commodity bonds. But Ridpath countered that true benevolence arises voluntarily in the free societies, not through mandated equality. The debate exposed a fundamental divide. Capitalists viewed morality as an absolute and individualist-centric, while socialists saw it as contextual and group-oriented. Strength and weaknesses. The capitalist side's strength was coherence and rigor. Their arguments formed a logical chain from metaphysics to politics, making socialism appear derivative and flawed. Peikoff's eloquence and Ridpath's factual command dominated, often putting the socialists on the defensive. Weakness for the capitalists included idealism. Critiques might argue pure capitalism ignores real-world power imbalances, but they addressed this by distinguishing cronyism from true laissez-faire. The socialist strength lay in emotional appeal, resonating with audiences concerned about poverty and injustice. However, the weakness was evident. Vague definition, e.g. socialism as a way of life without clear boundaries, and reliance on mixed systems diluted their case for socialism as inherently moral. They failed to counter the forced argument convincingly, often pivoting to critiques of capitalism excess rather than affirming socialist positivism. Overall, the debate was lopsided in favor of the capitalists, as the contemporary reviews noted their demolition of socialist claims to philosophical precision. Why the socialists were unable to give moral defense of socialism. The socialist inability to mount a robust moral defense stems from several interconnected factors, rooted in the debate's philosophical terrain and their strategic choices. First, they operated without consistent ethical framework comparable to objectivism's. Peikoff and Ridpath grounded morality in reason and individual survival, defining good as that which furthers life qua rational being. Socialism, by contrast, presupposes altruism, the moral duty to serve others, which objectivists reject as anti-life, as it demands self-sacrifice without rational justification. When Vickers and Kaplan appealed to needs or equality, they implicitly endorsed this altruism but failed to defend against its charges of arbitrariness. Why should one person's need obligate another's labor? They couldn't articulate a non-subjective basis for such obligations, often falling back on emotional pleas, e.g., compassion for the poor, which Peikoff dismissed as evasion of reason. Second, the socialists conceded ground by defending hybrid systems rather than pure socialism. Kaplan praised welfare states like Sweden, but this blurred the lines. If socialism morality requires state control, why dilute it with capitalist elements? This pragmatism undermined their claim to moral superiority, as it admitted socialism's impracticality without force, aligning with the capitalist critique that socialism inevitably leads to coercion. They couldn't reconcile democratic socialism with the initiation of force, as taxation and regulation still violate individual consent. Third, historical baggage weakened their position. Peikoff and Ridpath invoked socialism track record, famines, gulags, and poverty in regimes like the Soviet Union as evidence of immoral consequences. The socialists distanced themselves from those, not true socialism, but this no true Scotsman fallacy left them without positive exemplars. They couldn't demonstrate socialism achieving moral ends without descending into tyranny, as the capitalists argued that collectivism inherently erodes rights. Finally, tactical errors amplified their failure. Evasive responses during cross-examination, e.g. redefining force as social responsibility, allowed Peikoff to highlight inconsistencies. Vickers' feminist angles, while insightful, didn't address core ethics, appearing as divisioners. Ultimately, socialism's moral defense requires accepting sacrifice as virtuous, but against objectivism's egoist standard, this collapsed into self-contradiction, promising fulfillment through self-denial. The socialists couldn't bridge this gap, rendering their defense superficial and unconvincing. Thank you for watching today's video, and we'll see you in the next video.